So I think it is going to be instructive to get a few things out of the way right at the top of this video, because it will help to kind of outline exactly what sort of argument I'm going to be trying to make in this video. So first thing, Dark Souls 2 is not my overall favourite in the Sakura Soulsborne series of games. It's not even in my top 3, which is Bloodborne, Sekiro and Dark Souls 1, the specific order of those three changing depending on what game I am playing and what, if I'm being frank, I am nostalgic for. Nostalgia is a big thing when it comes to writing about the Sakura Soulsborne games, I've discovered, particularly with regard to DS1, and you see it all the time if you find yourself perusing the message boards on an idle Monday. DS1 will always hold a place in my heart because it was my first Souls game, and like other firsts in life, your first Souls experience is not something that is forgotten, ever, really. That being said, however, I have to be honest with myself when I'm getting all misty-eyed about Dark Souls 1, and acknowledge that my memories focus almost entirely on the above-ground parts of Lordran, your undead asylums, your undead burgs, your undead parishes, your Anarlondos, and of course your lovely, lovely Firelink shrines. The whole back half of the game functionally doesn't exist as far as my memory is concerned, looking into the past as it does through rose-tinted spectacles. Everything past the Lord Vessel just doesn't display the same thoroughness and complexity of level design that the first half of the game is rightly lauded for, which, as a nice little bit of planting on behalf of scriptwriting Luke, I shall return to. I guess what I am saying is that Dark Souls 2 is my least favourite of the Sakura Soulsborne games, which I admit is an odd stance to take in a video making the case in support of Dark Souls 2. I'm not sure I really like Dark Souls 3 any more than DS2. I think it is derivative, uninspired, and a frankly cowardly attempt to win back the fans that they had alienated with DS2's, let us say, troubled press campaign and release. Dark Souls 3, however, inarguably looks better and is the most Bloodborne adjacent of all the other Sekiro Soulsborne games, both aesthetically and in terms of the whole pace of the gameplay itself. The most recent games in the Sakura Soulsborne series, DS3, Bloodborne and Sekiro itself, are all much faster paced games which place much higher emphasis on speed, aggression and moving towards enemies, all of which suit my particular playstyle, which I think is going to become pretty evident as you watch the gameplay I captured while doing the research for this video. All of that being said, I think that DS2 does try to bring new ideas to the formula that was kind of refined by DS1. It does try to go its own way using its own interpretation of that formula, and I think that all of the most successful ideas are present in later games in one form or another. I also think that there are things about DS2 that I really do not like, and there are legitimate criticisms of DS2 that exist outside of the main issue that I think Dark Souls 2 has. The one big issue, the only mistake that Dark Souls 2 made, and I'm going to talk about all of these things now because here I go, really leaning into the clickbaity spirit that is promised by the state of the title of this video by saying, "Oh, Dark Souls 2, you unfairly maligned black sheep in the family of golden egg-laying geese," to mix metaphors. You are unfairly maligned, overlooked, underrated, and I've come to fix you. I found the answer, and in the finding, this has become a Dark Souls 2 stan account apparently, because the game was rigged from the start, and this is why. People expect sequels, particularly video game sequels, to be more of the same. Maybe there are new characters, maybe there are new settings to explore, maybe there are new weapons and some graphical polish applied to the old ones, but, and this is why I am referring to games here, mechanically speaking, sequels are expected to be pretty much the same. Ultimately, and perhaps most obviously with any sequel in any medium, its very existence implies certain financial and critical acclaim attached to its predecessor, and thereby implies that just more of what made its predecessor successful must itself beget success. I haven't played the most recent Doom game, it's certainly on my list, but I can pretty confidently predict that the basic combat rhythm is still going to be built around staggering enemies to gain health and using your choppy chainsaw to gain ammunition. It is probably the best thing about the Doom 2016 reboot. Id have been in the game too long not to know a good thing when they see one. Trying out something completely different would change the flow of the game, and while it might be good, maybe even great, it would inevitably pose the question, but is it Doom? In fact, I can probably answer that question right now. Sometimes new mechanics are added, but when they are, it is usually done with an incredibly light touch. It's like a set of scales, add something to one side, no matter how trivial, how seemingly inconsequential it is, and instantly you are having to deal with an imbalance, which means having to counteract it by removing something on the other side. Every action has an equal opposite reaction, to paraphrase old Isaac there. And I'm looking through gaming history and trying to find any examples of sequels that are complete mechanical breaks from the game that made the series successful enough to warrant a sequel in the first place, and I'm struggling. Let's just skip to the most famous gaming sequels, shall we, and pick one at random. Half-Life 2. Different setting, yes. New characters, yes. It certainly looks better than Half-Life, and undoubtedly is more narratively and thematically pleasing, but mechanically, you're still running around and shooting stuff, and the physics puzzles that so amazed people in 2004 were still present in 1998, though not nearly to such an extent. Okay, maybe that one is an anomaly. Let's try Portal 2. There's an even greater emphasis on comedy and a bit more of a narrative drive compared to the first one, but it's still the same setting, broadly the same characters and the same mechanics. You're always thinking with Portals though, there are mechanical additions in the form of goo that augment how the player engages with the environments to move forward. Still though, hardly a complete revolution, is it? Maybe it's a Valve thing, maybe Valve just like milking their cash cows. How about Call of Duty? Oh, they're all the same. They're all just the same game. But hold on, there is at least one game franchise that functionally changes everything from game to game, while still adhering to a handful of design philosophies that run as a kind of backbone throughout the entire series, making it identifiably that series. I wonder what it could be. The Sakura Soulsborne series of games are one of what must be a very small number of well-established franchises that fundamentally change almost everything about themselves with each iteration. I haven't played all the games yet, but in terms of the big tentpole franchises, your Bioshocks, your Borderlands, your Wolfensteins, there's nothing like the Sakura Soulsborne games in terms of mechanical variation, thematic variation, setting, tone, whatever else you care to name. Give someone completely unfamiliar with From Software a copy of Sekiro to play for an hour, and then a copy of Dark Souls to play for an hour, and maybe the most that they could say would be that one inspired the other. The same with Bloodborne and Sekiro. Dark Souls 3 and Dark Souls, hold on, no, people would just think it's a remaster. Yes, DS3 is watery brown soup, debate me. This is going to perhaps be an out there thing to say, but here goes. There isn't really such a thing as a Dark Souls sequel. There are games that chronologically come out after each other, but really, beyond the core concepts which are more or less retained intact throughout all the games I'm talking about here, and I say more or less because I will return to this in a little bit, really these games are as different from each other as they are to any other game in the third-person action RPG-ish genre thing that the Sakura Soulsborne games occupy. In fact, they have their own genre, sort of, Souls-like, but that is more of a marketing creation than any real artistic crystallization of what all of the games purport to be. You know, if you're just trying to market a third-person game where you kill monsters with swords and stuff, putting Souls-like on the back of the box isn't going to hurt sales now, is it? Demon's Souls to Dark Souls to DS2 to Bloodborne to DS3 to Sekiro. Each successor keeps a certain amount, and again, I promise I will talk about what this certain amount is really soon, you guys. But I would argue that there are more changes between successive games, thematic, mechanical, narrative, and these changes give each game its own unique feel. And you don't need to look very far to see examples of the flavour of the games changing as the series develops, all because of the mechanical changes that are made. Mechanics are everything in games. I love talking about mechanics. Take the humble health bar and how it is used throughout the Sakura Soulsborne series. In Demon's Souls, dying instantly reduces your health bar by half, and it is only restored by defeating a boss. Dark Souls got rid of this mechanic, but repurposed it for when you get cursed instead, something that didn't happen too often because there aren't very many enemies that use this form of attack. Fuck you, basilisks. Dark Souls 2 brought the idea back, except health reduces gradually with each death instead of right the way to 50% straight off. Sekiro and Bloodborne don't use the idea of health reduction at all, while Dark Souls 3 has some enemies that can reduce your maximum HP bar if you're within their line of sight, but it does return to normal again slowly. DS3 also increases your maximum HP when you use a certain item, but doing so leaves you vulnerable to invasions, which are a mechanic unto themselves that each game handles differently, but which I won't talk about here because already this video is too long, and also because I never really bother with it. I will say that from what I've read, DS2 completely messed invasions up. It's something to do with soul memory, brief description here, please edit Luke. All of that refers to one bar in the corner of the screen, and how you replenish that bar is handled differently in each game as well. Demon's Souls had health items called grasses that you could buy or farm by killing enemies over and over and over again. Dark Souls got rid of farmable health items, Dark Souls 2 brought them back alongside the Estus Flask that Dark Souls introduced, while Bloodborne went completely back to the health regeneration system Demon Souls had, though it did introduce rallying where you can regain health by dealing damage within a small window after that damage has been received. For completeness, Dark Souls 3 used broadly the same system as Dark Souls, except with two different types of Estus Flasks, one for health and one for magic. Sekiro, as far as I can tell, uses completely the same health system as Dark Souls. By my count then, the entire series of 6 games, not including the Kingsfield games, has 4 or 5 different health systems depending on how you count, and 5 different health regeneration systems if you include Bloodborne's rallying mechanic. I have just been talking about one bar here, how it is depleted and then how it is replenished. A total of 10 different interpretations on the idea of health and healing mechanics over a series of 6 games. And if we go back to our set of scales from earlier, we see how these tiny, almost trivial changes can completely change the way that the games feel. The simple act of healing in Bloodborne is so much faster than in any of the other games, a quick injection of health as opposed to the ponderous swig from your flask of staying alive juice, as in all of the other games. I haven't even described the combat mechanics in each of these games yet, because each game's different interpretation of the basic combat blueprint as set out in Demon Souls and Dark Souls is inextricably linked to how each game handles healing. If you change one thing, everything else changes as a result. As I pointed out, the simple act of healing in the numbered Souls games is a lot slower. In Dark Souls, your character actually stops moving completely while they are swigging from their Estus, and this makes the pace of gameplay and therefore of combat itself a lot more deliberate, a lot more cumbersome than, say, Bloodborne, for instance. Emphasis is placed on dodging attacks, healing within the space of time you've bought for yourself by making space between you and your opponent's next attack, and then dealing damage. Whereas Bloodborne rewards a much more aggressive method of play, beautifully crystallising the entire game's design philosophy in the rallying mechanic, which I've already described. In the numbered Souls games, you move away from the enemy when you take damage. In Bloodborne, you step towards them to take back the health that you've just lost. I would go so far as to say that Bloodborne would be a completely different game if it didn't have this mechanic. The game would still have its pace, its speed, but the aggressive style that is burned into you as you play just wouldn't be there. And then you have Sekiro, wonderful, beautiful, infuriating Sekiro, which I argue has the most sophisticated, most precise, most complex combat mechanics of the lot, in terms of the number of things that the game is demanding the player pay attention to at any one time, and the number of systems that a player has to master in order to proceed. Because in Sekiro you essentially have kind of 3 health bars that you have to manage. You have your actual health, obviously, but then you have your posture bar, which builds as you take physical damage from enemies, as well as when you successfully engage with your enemies. Imperfect blocks of an enemy's attack will raise your posture bar, and if it is filled, you are staggered and the enemy has an opportunity for a free hit, potentially dealing catastrophic damage. But all this time you are filling up your enemy's posture bar too, which is the 3rd health bar you have to consider, arguably, and I'm not counting their actual health bar because more often than not you will fill their posture bar long before you deplete their health. When their posture is depleted, you can perform a death blow, but while you are managing your own posture, making sure that it isn't filled, you can't let your enemy's posture decrease either, otherwise you have to build it all up again. And all of this time you have to make sure you have enough health, which means making space between you and your enemy to have a swig, which gives their posture time to recover. And all of this is without mentioning the fact that the perfect blocks don't deplete your stamina, the lower health either you or your enemy has means that their respective posture bars fill up quicker, and the various buffs that both you and your opponents can use to reduce posture build-up. It isn't the healing mechanics that change and inform the way that Sekiro plays, it's the dual methods open to the player of defeating enemies. But that in itself dictated the healing mechanic that From decided to use in the game. Emphasising perfect blocking and timings, learning your enemy's attacks, meant that, ideally, the player shouldn't have to heal at all. This has always been kind of the case, obviously, in the Souls series, but Sekiro designs its fights, particularly its boss fights, so that the big bads of the game, your Ishins, your Lady's Butterfly, can be put down relatively quickly once you master their attack patterns and tells. Sekiro is designed so that players who display true mastery of a boss can defeat the most powerful enemies in the game so quickly that healing just isn't necessary, which emphasises blocking attacks and getting your own timings exactly perfect to proceed. Each of the 6 games under the Sakura Soulsborne umbrella have different attitudes to weapons, armour, upgrading said weapons and armour, in-game currency, levelling up, magic, invasions and illusory walls. Seriously from, make up your minds on this one. There are so many differences, with each one having implications for other mechanical aspects of the game, that it becomes easier to describe the similarities, though even then boiling down the core idea of the Sakura Soulsborne games into a sentence or two becomes very difficult. But I shall try. In the Sakura Soulsborne games, you kill enemies. Each kill earns you a currency which can be spent. If you die, all or part of that currency that you have earned up until that point is lost, the enemies all respawn, and you have to fight your way back through them to collect the currency you just dropped. I would challenge anyone to make a more succinct statement about the series that could apply to all of the games at once, aside from the idea of the challenge or the difficulty that these games are famous for, which I will come on to, and I accept that even that statement is flawed because it doesn't quite describe the design philosophy of Sekiro as accurately as I would like. It is a testimony to the completely different design attitudes of all of these games that in getting the capture for this video, switching between titles is kind of a challenge in itself, as there is a period where you basically have to unlearn the rhythms of one game to play another one successfully. I played a bit more of Dark Souls 3 immediately after defeating the Demon of Hatred and Ishin the Sword Saint, and the difference in the feel and texture between the two games is like night and day. I struggled more than I am prepared to admit with the High Wall of Lothric after playing Sekiro, and I have hours and hours in that game. Not to mention the completely different control schemes, though I think this is mainly a port issue on DS2's behalf, though I admit it is far superior to the Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition where you have to download a third-party program to even use the game at anything like a satisfactory level. The Dark Souls remaster is great, but the Skull of the First Sin edition of DS2, which I've been playing for this video, is essentially occupying the same space as the Dark Souls remaster, and even then From didn't bother to make the control scheme fall in line with every other game in the series. The number of times I've come from Dark Souls into Dark Souls 2 and tried to pick up an item with E but instead used a precious flask of Estus is innumerable. Seriously From, do better with your ports. Maybe it is easier to think about this in terms of another series of games. Let's say the FIFA games. So for argument's sake, let's take FIFA 18. It is really successful at simulating and mechanising a game of football and all the other stuff that one expects from a football game. Probably. I don't know, the last time I properly followed football was when Peter Schmeichel was at Manchester United, so I guess that ages me. Anyway, FIFA 18. You've got your buying and selling players, formations, tactics, designing kits, maybe there is some part of the game dedicated to building a stadium and selling advertising space, setting ticket prices, everything like that. FIFA 18 is a huge hit, introduces new people to the series, transcends its genre and becomes a touchstone for this particular type of football game. So, the developers make a sequel, and it's called FIFA 19. It's still at its core a football game, it's still at its core FIFA 18, but it's changed some of the ways it does things. Maybe it gets rid of the whole stadium management side of the game altogether. Maybe it adds some new mechanic that makes running with a digital ball more nuanced. Maybe it rearranges its entire way of setting information in front of the player. It's still really successful with critics, perhaps even more so, but there is something about FIFA 19 that sticks in the craw with some players. Old players, that is. New players, people who have never played a FIFA game in their life, have no reference and so are more likely to accept FIFA 19 for what it is. Old players loved FIFA 18 so much and were so excited for more of the same when they bought FIFA 19, but the game is different, but it's also still kind of the same. Some will complain that it's been dumbed down with the more streamlined menu interface, some will say that the new finessed ball running mechanic is fidgety, some will say that it just isn't FIFA 18. But FIFA 19 was never trying to be FIFA 18. It was trying to be its own game, its own interpretation of the FIFA formula, while still using a recognisable aspect of that formula as its blueprint. Sure, it might be successful critically, almost certainly commercially, but there will always be a loud section of the fanbase that will never stand for it. #NotMyFIFA. But what if FIFA 19 was called something else? The FIFA games actually already do this with their FIFA Street series. It's still FIFA, it's still a football game, but with small changes made, some things removed, some things added. FIFA 19 could have been FIFA Street 19, and suddenly it is being held to very different standards than it otherwise would have been. So maybe the FIFA analogy doesn't quite map onto the Souls series exactly, but the broad principle is sound. And if we just change the names, the analogy still holds. Change FIFA 18 for Dark Souls, change FIFA 19 for Dark Souls 2, change FIFA Street 19 for Bloodborne. The name matters. Enough. This video is getting too long and I think you get the point. Hidetaka Miyazaki has gone on record saying that he didn't want to create an endless series of Sakura Soulsborne sequels, and he is right to think that. Just adding a 2 or a 3 at the end of the first game's title always seems to me like a cop-out, as though the artist has just rearranged the same ingredients that had gone into the delicious pie that you had loved the first time round. It doesn't matter in what order you add the ingredients, the pie is still going to taste the same. It might still be yummy, but I already had the first pie, which was just as yummy. Why bother make the second one in the first place? Dark Souls 2 wanted to be its own thing. It wasn't just happy to be a Dark Souls sequel, just more of the same. The 2 in Dark Souls 2 invites comparison, a comparison that the other named games in the series, Bloodborne and Sekiro, are not subject to, despite the fact that, as I've argued, these games are as different from Dark Souls as Dark Souls 2 is. Dark Souls 2's status as a sequel implies that it is submitting itself to the same criteria as Dark Souls was itself held to. The naming of Dark Souls 2 is wrong because it patently isn't just the same dish reheated. Ingredients have been taken away, new ones have been added, maybe they increase the quantity of some old ingredients. Jesus, this food analogy is getting overdone. Or perhaps it's half-baked. Dark Souls 2 is trying to be so much more than a piece of work that is only worthy of slapping a 2 on the end of its title. And I'm not saying that everything it does is good or even fun. If you thought the first Dark Souls was aesthetically bleak, then my god, DS2 is telling you to hold its beer. But all of this makes sense in terms of the game's themes and story. You bring light back to the dark forgotten places of Dranglake, No Man's Wharf, the Grave of Saints, Brightstone Cove. Death and rebirth are a touchstone throughout the Souls series specifically, and DS2 really leans into this idea. What I'm trying to say is that each game in the Sakura Soulsborne series is so different compared to every other game on almost every level that pretty much the only thing connecting them, beyond the mission statement that I just suggested, is that they were all developed by the same company. And the thing is, I think From Software have realised this themselves. FromSoft haven't released a numbered sequel in the Sakura Soulsborne series since 2016, and this is because the idea of sequels themselves is marketing bullshit. Hello there everyone, thank you very much for getting to the end of the video. This is me in kind of non-video mode, just doing a little bit of a chat, I guess, at the end of this video. So it was kind of, I made this one in kind of response to my most successful video, I guess, which is another video about Dark Souls 2. That got over 12, that's on 1,200 views or something like that, which is a pretty big deal for me, to be honest, right now. After a year of doing this, I think that Dark Souls 2 video came out actually about a year ago, so it's like an anniversary for it, if you like. So that's one thing. So I made the video in response to that. Just because people obviously seem to like watching videos about Dark Souls 2, and who am I to say that they shouldn't keep watching content about Dark Souls 2? And the other thing is that I got over 100 subscribers, which again is, in the grand scheme of things, is not a huge number, but it's a milestone for me, I guess. So that's kind of part of the reason that I'm making this this kind of little announcement at the end of the video. Looking forward, I've got a couple of videos in mind. I'm working on the third Red Dead Redemption 2 video in the series. It's going to be the longest video that I've made to date. It's going to be about an hour long, I reckon, when it's all completed and everything, and it's all edited and stuff. It's going to be about the mechanics of Red Dead Redemption 2, and turns out I have quite a lot to say about Red Dead Redemption 2's mechanics. So that's going to be the next video. It's not going to be along for a little while. Probably we're looking at about June. I want to kind of increase the production quality as well. I want to do a bit more to camera, talking to camera, and that means getting better lighting and all that other kind of stuff. So that is going to kind of put that one off a little bit, but we're looking at like the end of June, and then I'm about to start playing Vampire, and I'm going to make a video about that regardless of whether it's any good or not. So so that's kind of what I'm going to be working on for the next couple of months, I suppose. That's kind of all I wanted to say, really. Thank you very much again for watching to the end of the video. Do leave a comment if you if you're interested in anything I said, or if you want me to respond to anything. I do still have capture from all the Dark Souls games that I've been playing, so I might, if there's enough interest, go into do my own defense of Dark Souls 2 video, because there is a lot to say about Dark Souls 2, I think, and I think it'd be I'd be interested in making another video. So do leave a comment, telling me what you think and whether you'd be interested in hearing what I have to say about Dark Souls 2, and subscribe if you want to see more, and enjoy the rest of your bank holiday weekend.